Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked, the series where I talk about every single book on my shelf because I went into the woods one day and an old man was there and he told me to do this and made me promise, but then when I went back to ask him some questions about it, he had disappeared and all there was a circle of mushrooms. Today I'm going to be talking about a book that entered my life in 2020. I'm going to talk about Roseanne Brown's A Song of Wraiths and Ruin. Showing you the cover. Ba-da-da-da. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible. I don't think I'm going to talk about any spoilers. If anything comes up, I'll put spoiler skips. I bought this book myself. This is a YA fantasy book that released in June of 2020 and saw a fair amount of hype here on the bookish internet. It is the first instalment in a West African folklore-inspired duology, with the sequel, A Psalm of Storms and Silence, is due to release in June of 2021. Roseanne Brown was born in Ghana and then moved to Maryland when she was a child and now currently lives just outside of Washington, D.C. She has a background in writing fiction and also in journalism. As ever, I will have her website linked below so that you can check out any more information on her other books and anything else you might be interested in. This is a dual point of view story. We have two perspectives. We have Karina and Malik. And Karina is the crown princess of the city Ziran. It's a desert city. Karina was already struggling to live up to the memory of her older sister, and then she's forced into an even more precarious position after her mother, the Sultana, is assassinated. Karina has to try and keep her fracturing land together throughout this Celestia festival, and also in the background she's kind of thinking maybe she might try and resurrect her mother with dark magic. But to do that she'll need the heart of a king, and what better way to get a king than to offer up your hand in marriage as a prize for the winner of the Celestia competition. Malik, by contrast, is a young boy trying to escape his war-torn country with his sisters. They want to start a new life in the city, but everything goes a bit wrong when his younger sister is kidnapped by a vengeful spirit. Malik's forced into a deal where he can have his sister back, but only if he kills the princess. And what way to get close to the princess? Why, it might just be to enter that competition, of course. I think you get the gist of where this story's going. On the surface level, I could draw a lot of comparisons between elements of this plot and elements of various other YA fantasy books we've seen over the years. What I think that this book does well and does differently is it combines those tropes into something a little bit new. We've all seen the assassin finds their way into the royal competition to get close to their target thing. We've read that book before, but I think the fact that this book balances that with Karina has her own agenda and she has her own subterfuge going on, and arguably it's a little bit more questionable than Malik's intentions. All of that combined, along with a lot of the other stuff that's happening in this book, makes the book feel not too tropey YA fantasy-y, while still retaining a lot of the essence that makes that enjoyable as a type of book to read. In terms of plot, is exactly what I like in a book. It's a clear structure of events as part of a competition, love a competition, around which the rest of the story can grow. Of course, that does always run a risk that the second book won't be as strong as the first one because you don't have that clear structure, but we shall wait until June to pass judgment on that. I really like the setting, and I don't just mean the world and the culture, but I think the fact that this book takes place across a festival in this desert city was really, really powerful because it brings together all these different elements of society and it heightens the action and it creates all these wonderful moments of tension and celebration, all just because of the way that this book is set. I feel like I need to reframe this slightly. I'm a little bit too high up. Can I do that halfway through a video? Probably. There's a lot of big things happening, but because of this kind of heightened atmosphere of this festival, it all feels very natural. That's not to say I'm not excited to see more of the world beyond the city after the sequel, but I think the city is a really, really good setting. We get a lot of the vibrance of the culture and the people, but also Roseanne Brown manages to balance that with a lot of claustrophobia around the city, particularly in Karina's viewpoint. Just, this is more an additional note. I am always a sucker for description of clothing, particularly formal clothing, ball gowns, all of that, it hits home, and this book has a lot of really good clothing description. I enjoyed it. I actually thought that the romance in this book was very interestingly done, and I do mean that in a positive way. I've said it before, a YA fantasy romance isn't going to be for everyone. Some people really do not enjoy them, and that is perfectly fine. I think in this instance, I would be more likely to recommend this book to somebody who'd been burned by YA romance before. Don't get me wrong, some of the characters get feelings for each other quite quickly, and those feelings are arguably kind of intense, but I think that intensity is really well managed. What we don't have is, I saw you one time in the street, we made eye contact, and now I would jump in front of an army for you. One of the moments that really stuck out for me is there's a character reflecting on what their life might be like if they could be with another character and what their feelings might be in the future. And I thought that was really interesting because so often YA fantasy romance is about the here and now. It's not really about the future beyond the odd, oh, if only we could one day live together in an epilogue and be very happy. This was much more, I want to know where my feelings with this person could go because I'm not going to let them go there yet. And I just thought that was really interesting in a way that I haven't seen YA romance handled very often. A few things that maybe I didn't enjoy quite so much. I wanted a little bit more from Karina, and I think the issue was, and this may be a personal thing, I find alternating between point of views when it's just your point of view quite difficult, especially if you're not seeing two sides of the same scene. So you have two characters doing quite different things, and I'd find I was just getting into the swing of Karina's story, and then suddenly I'd be in Malik's story and I'd have to get my head around that. I just found it a little bit difficult to do, and maybe that's just me, but it's probably something to keep in mind if you have a similar problem. Another thing that's probably personal preference, I wanted a little bit more out of the magic in this book, and I think it's similar to other stories where the magic isn't a huge part of the setting to begin with, so maybe I went in with unrealistic expectations, but what I am hoping for in the second book is a little bit more of an exploration of this magic and what it means. Some comparisons if you are interested in reading anything similar. I feel like comparing this to the Orisha series by Tomi Adeyemi is a little bit obvious, and it will come across as like, I'm a white person who's read like all of the really popular YA fantasy by black authors. I am going to recommend that because I think it's a good series so far, and I would recommend it to you if you enjoy YA fantasy. I will also recommend Raybearer, which I have recently read when I'm filming this and I think was absolutely phenomenal. Also really, really great YA fantasy. If you have any more recommendations for YA fantasy books by black authors or adult fantasy books by black authors or sci-fi, please do put them in the comments below. I'm always looking to expand my reading in that area because I will completely call myself out and say that I fall a bit flat when it comes to recommending those things. The last recommendation I maybe have is the first book in the Mask of Shadows duology. I'm going to check that's what it's called. Yes, by Lindsay Miller, which is similarly a contest. It's framed slightly differently, but there were some familiarities between this and that book, and I think maybe that would be something to explore if you were interested. Do I think you should read this? Yes, I do. I think it's well worth a read if you're into YA fantasy and maybe you want something that explores kind of familiar tropes in a bit of an unfamiliar way, but still delivers on the same kind of feelings you get from those tropes. I will say this isn't one of my top YA fantasy reads. I have others that I love a lot more. I think something about this is just a little bit too slow for me, but I think that when the second book is out, it's going to be a really strong duology when paired together, and we will have to wait and see until June to find out. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Overbooked. I hope it's been informative and interesting. You can also follow me on all of my social media. That is linked below. You can subscribe because it makes me feel loved and appreciated. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. As ever, I will have her website. Come on, Judith.